Hey there, kiddos, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Uncle Frank, hoping that you are having a great day. And in today's video, I'm going to be sitting back in my very squeaky chair, relaxing and having a little conversation with all of you guys about the comic book industry, specifically about a relatively recent-ish trend that I've been noticing in the comic book industry, and that is comic book blind bags, and I'd like to talk about my overall opinions on them. But first, before we talk about blind bags and their method of distributing variant covers and all that jazz, I feel like we should briefly go over variant covers and their history in comic books. You see, comic books as an industry is almost 100 years old, actually, now that I think about it. It started in the early-ish 1930s, and for most of comic book history, every issue, every printing of a comic book more or less looked the same. In fact, if you got an issue of X-Men, it didn't really matter where you got that issue of X-Men. It was going to have basically the same cover. Sure, there was going to be minor print differences because of factory stuff, or maybe there was going to be a regional variant based on where in the world you might be. But for the most part, you go to a dollar store or the corner store or maybe even a dedicated comic book shop, and every copy of this specific issue of the X-Men would look the same. The same is true for Spider-Man or Batman or Action Comics, whatever have you. And for the most part, for comic book history, that worked. You know, people would buy the comics they wanted and move on. But in the early 90s, things changed a bit, and the comic book market became a lot more speculative, with people guessing as to what future values for a lot of comic books could be, and publishers leaned into this speculative frenzy strong, and they started doing all sorts of gimmicks to try and boost sales on the primary market. And one of those gimmicks that they tried was they introduced variant covers, where the exact same issue of a comic would have different covers at different rarities. Some covers were easier to get a hold of, others were harder to get a hold of. Eventually they introduced the incentive package where you, as a store, would have to buy so many copies of the comic to get the rarer incentive covers, etc. And you know what? It worked. The early 90s was kind of this hot spot for these amazing variant covers, and they did bring a lot of money into the industry overall. In fact, a famous story that a lot of people know about at this point is X-Men #1 from 1991 had 5 variants at release, and those 5 variant covers heavily contributed to making X-Men #1 the most sold comic book of all time. It was an absolute smash hit, and I think even today I think it might still be the #1 selling comic of all time because, in part because of those variant covers. Now, as the 90s dragged on and variant covers and other gimmicks, you know, don't get me wrong, there were other gimmicks being tried by the industry at this time. There were the abuse of the #1 issue. There were things like gold and lenticular covers and all that jazz. But variant covers, while they did strongly contribute to sales initially, as time wore on and more people started to catch on to just how many of these variant covers were out there, they started to become a drag on the comic industry. They started producing more glut than collectability. And it resulted in the big near complete collapse of the comic industry. The variant covers heavily contributed to the crash of the late 90s. In fact, Marvel especially famously almost lost everything. As they say, if I recall correctly, it was the MCU, the big Iron Man film, that really saved Marvel as a franchise. Because, yeah, it's hard to recover from a complete crash, but they pulled it off. Now, while cover variants did contribute to the crash, and they did contribute to what was seen as this almost junkification of comics in the late 90s, they never really went away. In fact, variant covers have remained to this day a very popular method of propping up sales for various issues or creating a bit of extra collectability. And there's no denying that there is this nice little air of collectability to comic covers, especially if you are a collectionist, completionist kind of guy, especially if you're a big fan of a particular series. Let's say that you're a Batman fan, right? And the new Batman issue has 7 different covers, sorry, and you know for a fact that at least one of them is a convention exclusive, one of them you can only get if your comic shop ordered 100 issues or whatever. So obviously it's going to be a big chase for you to go out of your way to try and get all of these variant covers all in one place for your personal Batman collection. There are people out there who very much enjoy that chase, enjoy hunting down the rarer or harder to source variant covers. All well and good. So these cover variants never went away, and they do still to this day contribute to comic book sales. There's no denying that. But recently, comic publishers have started adding a new gimmick to the mix, where rather than guaranteeing you which variant cover you could get, they have started the gamblification of the comic book industry. I believe it was in 2024 when we started seeing comic book blind bags, and now they are quite popular. They're not everywhere, they haven't completely dominated the shelves at your local comic shop yet, but they definitely are a thing. And in case you couldn't tell by the fact that I'm not waving a blind bag around at you guys, I am personally not a huge fan of them. So, as a whole, I do believe that blind bags, let's call them comic book packs, because that's basically what they are. They're a weird mix between comic books and TCG packs, right? Comic packs are this potentially very exciting way of accessing comic books and variant covers. You are still guaranteed the comic inside, right? It's like this weird mix of TCGs and blind boxes and gambling and comic books. You are gambling, but you're gambling with a floor. You are still guaranteed at the end of the day the specific comic issue you're looking for. If you're a big fan of Daredevil, and there's a new Daredevil blind bag issue out, if you buy that blind bag, you are still getting the Daredevil issue you're looking to read. Same author and all that jazz. Nothing there's changing, but there is this element of gambling to it where the cover art you're getting is randomized. And I believe that while that can be exciting for some people, especially newer people getting into the hobby, and might even be a little draw for the collectors, turning their hunt for the variant covers into this kind of little mini game, I do believe, personally, in my opinion, that turning comic books, turning anything that really shouldn't be gambling into gambling is just overall more damaging than it is helpful. Especially since it can kind of really accelerate this glut of unwanted and unloved issue copies. Especially for, I know it's rough to say that some people just need to learn self-control, but there are people out there who genuinely would have self-control problems when it comes to, well, anything gambling related. But when it comes to comics, they're looking for a specific version of a cover. They buy 14 blind bags at crazy blind bag prices, and they don't get the cover they want. But they're stuck with 14 copies of the same comic that now they have to offload because it's taking up space on their shelf. Wild stuff. Obviously, that's a bit of an extreme example, but you guys get what I'm saying. This can definitely lead to this kind of, if you're not careful, almost stockpile of unwanted comics at random people's houses. Which, if you remember, is part of what led to the collapse of the comic industry in the late 90s. A lot of stockpiled and undesired comics with a lot of initial excitement, but at the end of the day, not a lot of long-term fan demand, which can be quite devastating. Now, like I said, these do definitely contribute to sales. In fact, there is a benefit that I don't think I mentioned, is that if I'm correct, and I confess I didn't look into this too discerningly, but it looks like a lot of variant covers, even the rarer ones that can be found in blind bags, they eliminate the need for incentive purchases. Rather than having to buy 100 copies of a specific comic in order to get the incentive cover, well, now you just have to buy the blind bag and see who all can pull it, right? So there's that. There's that to account for. Overall, like I said, I'm not a huge fan. Especially when, for the most part, I should clarify that I have not looked at every single comic variant price across every issue from a blind bag, obviously. But from what I've seen broadly, variant covers aren't crazy expensive for like even some of the rarer ones. There definitely are some pricey ones out there, don't get me wrong, $50, $100, etc. But that's a $100 guarantee rather than buying potentially 5 or more copies of a blind bag to get issue copies that you don't want. Why would you go for the random chance when the guarantee is right there? Obviously, you could be saving a few dollars in the short term, but if, as anybody from the TCG world will tell you, the guarantee is always better than random chance. Every time, right? Never buy randomly what you can have for guaranteed, right? Overall, though, like I said, there can be some excitement in it. There can be genuine fun in the practice, but I worry that in the long term, blind bags will be more damaging to the industry than beneficial. That's all I have to say about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Comment down below if you agree with me or disagree with me, or if you are a fan of Chun-Li. And as always, check out my TCG Player Store, my eBay store, my Patreon, and the Discord channel where we talk about all kinds of random stuff. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.